Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, this week I got to see the church at its best. Not this church, the church of Jesus Christ at its best. The gathering took place in a conference room at Second Missionary Baptist Church and included some people from our congregation and some people from Second Missionary Baptist and some people from First Presbyterian and some people from Mount Zion AME and one person who had no church affiliation. There were about a dozen people in the room, black and white, female and male, sharing fellowship with each other, breaking bread together, and engaging each other in honest and thoughtful conversation about their deepest convictions. The last time I had listened to this group of people talking with each other, it had been a very different experience. It was over 4 years ago at our first sacred conversation on race. I remember there were about 30 of us sitting in a circle at Second Missionary Baptist, meeting together for the first time. It was an incredibly awkward and tense gathering. We didn't know each other. We didn't know what to expect from each other. We didn't even know what language to use to refer to each other. Are we white or Caucasian or Euro-American? Are you black, African, Afro-American? Everyone was trying to be really careful not to say or do anything that might offend anyone. We were overly respectful, very formal, qualifying everything we said to avoid any hint of impropriety. We were so unsure of ourselves that we hired a facilitator from the Center for the Healing of Racism just to help us find our way into conversation with each other. As the facilitator invited us to go around the circle and share our hopes for the time together, I remember one person in the group piping up and saying, "I hope we don't have to talk about slavery here. I never owned any slaves. I never supported slavery. I don't want to be blamed for slavery. I just want to talk about ways that we can get along with each other better." I remember feeling my heart sink at that moment. I wondered if people were going to get up and walk out. Just decide that this wasn't worth their time, that nothing significant was going to get shared in this sacred conversation. It was kind of like saying, "I don't really want to know you personally. I don't want to know about the events or the experiences that have shaped your life or the life of your ancestors. I don't want to know why you see things the way you do, why you react to things the way you do, why you interpret things the way you do. I don't really want to know who you are. I just want to get along with you in a sort of generic sense. Well, I didn't have much hope after that first sacred conversation on race. I didn't think it would go very deep or make much of an impact, but more than 4 years later, on Monday of this past week, I was invited to join the circle of a dozen people from that original meeting who stayed connected to each other, even after that rocky start. What I saw as I joined that circle on Monday was the church at its best. I saw people from different backgrounds and different experiences being together in authentic community, sharing their stories with each other openly and honestly, engaging each other's questions, listening to each other's insights, valuing each other's perspectives. They meet over lunch every Monday, each contributing something to the meal. They study together. They share their deepest convictions with each other, talk with each other about events and circumstances that are affecting their lives and the welfare of our city. One person with a really busy schedule who often comes dashing into the room at the last possible moment said that no matter how hectic her life becomes, she always protects the time to come and meet with this circle of friends. The people in the church that was gathered at Second Missionary Baptist on Monday were vulnerable and articulate and honest and respectful because trust had grown between them. Trust is the condition that makes it possible for us to share the truth of who we are with each other. It is one of the necessary conditions for authentic community to grow. Without trust, we cannot be vulnerable. We cannot acknowledge our fears, our uncertainties, our doubts, or our questions. Without trust, we remain guarded and aloof. We share things that are safe, things that we're confident that everyone will agree with, everyone will accept, everyone will approve. Without trust, authenticity and intimacy are impossible. So, how did this group of people get from, I don't really want to know you, to, I wouldn't miss this gathering for anything? The answer, I think, has to do with perseverance. They kept at it. They've been meeting together every Monday for 4 years. They've read books together, studied the Bible together, shared their values with each other, argued with each other, laughed with each other, prayed with each other, and eventually grew to love each other. They stayed connected, and in doing so, they learned to share their whole lives with each other. Their opinions of each other were no longer formed from one single statement they heard a person say, but by 4 years of listening to each other's stories and learning to appreciate the particular contexts that have shaped each other's lives, knowing the events and experiences that have colored each other's outlook. When I read the inspiring stories of the early church in the first few chapters of the book of the Acts of the Apostles, it reminds me of what I saw happening in that conference room on Monday. They broke bread together and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. All the people. Trust is the foundation of every authentic relationship. And trust grows through engagement. It comes from staying connected with each other, even when it's hard. Not withdrawing, not withholding our truth, but sharing the fullness of who we are with those who have earned the right to hear it. That's exactly what did not happen in our text today from 2 Samuel as the rift between Absalom and King David continued to widen. Last week we heard the story of Absalom killing his half-brother Amnon to avenge the rape of his sister Tamar. Amnon was David's firstborn, the rightful heir to the throne, the one who would inherit his father's wealth and power and privilege and authority. But when David failed to intervene and discipline Amnon for his heinous act of violence, Absalom knew that he would have to be the one to seek retribution. Absalom conspired to kill his half-brother Amnon and then fled the country and went to Geshur to live among his mother's ancestors. But after 3 years of isolation in exile, Absalom found himself longing for his family and his home, and so he petitioned his father David and asked to be allowed to return. David had also been longing for his son Absalom, and so he granted him permission to return to Jerusalem, but instead of coming together and reconciling their relationship, they remained isolated. They avoided each other. David never visited his son and never invited Absalom to come to his home. Absalom lived in the city of David, but was no closer to his father than when he was exiled in Geshur. They were in close physical proximity to each other, but they never connected with each other. Absalom never got to share his story with his father David. He never spoke to his dad about the anger and the frustration that he felt when David refused to hold Amnon accountable for his behavior. He never got to tell him what it was like to see his sister Tamar transformed from a beautiful young woman with a life full of promise to a desolate person isolated by shame and humiliation. He never got to talk with his dad about what it was like to take the life of another person or to flee from his family or to live in exile. He never got to hear his father tell him that he forgave him or acknowledge that even though he didn't approve of what Absalom had done, he at least understood why he felt compelled to do it. And David never got to tell Absalom his story. He never got to say what it was like to lose his firstborn son, the one on whom he had pinned such high hopes and expectations. He never got to express his deep regret over his failure to protect Tamar, or talk about how Amnon's violence triggered his own shame over the violent way that he had made Bathsheba his wife. He never got to tell his son how torn he was between his obligation as king to uphold the laws and his fatherly love for Absalom that nothing could ever diminish. Being in close physical proximity doesn't build trust. On the contrary, mistrust deepens when you have every opportunity to be engaged with each other but choose not to have any contact. 5 years passed before Absalom and David engaged each other again, and when they finally did come together, nothing significant was shared. Absalom bowed in shame. David kissed his son. Not a word is recorded in the text. They stayed stuck in their shame and in their silence, in their anger, in their resentment, in their fear, and in their isolation. The mistrust continued to deepen until Absalom eventually took up arms against his father and led an insurrection to usurp his throne. Isolation breeds mistrust. Mistrust breeds violence. But this week, I got to see how trust has the power to transform people's lives, to break down the dividing walls of hostility, and to build authentic community. By staying connected to each other, this group that didn't even know how to talk to each other 4 years ago has grown to love each other. Sitting at table with them on Monday was the highlight of my week and went a long way in restoring my hope for the future of the church. At one point during the conversation on Monday, the person in the circle who doesn't belong to any church said, "If this is what church was like, I would join right now." What she didn't realize was that she was in church that very moment. When we dare greatly enough to trust each other with the truths that we have to share. We are the church at its absolute best. Amen.